Imagine your commute to work takes you deep into a subterranean realm, buried beneath billions of tons of volcanic rock.
Might have been 2 miles in.
That's what Janice Sanders got to do more than 40 years ago in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado.
So you'd go 2 miles in and a couple thousand feet up. You're in the belly of the mountain.
In the 1980s, at the Sunnyside Mine, northeast of Silverton, miners followed a vein of rock rich with gold. Blasting it apart, funneling chunks of ore down chutes and hauling them out of the mountain on rail cars. As a geologist, Janice roamed around the matrix of tunnels, often alone.
It's not all lighted. You depend on your headlamp. So if you turned off your light, you're in absolute darkness. Dark, darker, and darkest.
These were some of the last years of hard rock mining in Colorado. But at the time, gold prices were high, and the Sunnyside Mine was still going. One time, she was on her way to take some samples of newly extracted rock when she passed a crew of muckers. That's what they call the guys who move ore around inside a mine.
There were some muckers. They were loading one of the rail cars with a mucking machine. And sometimes they would have to blast a big rock and stuff. And they're always supposed to watch to make sure nobody had gone past them so that they didn't shoot at the wrong time.
What do you mean by shoot?
Blast, cause a blast, like to break a rock and stuff. Well, I walked by to go sample beyond them. So they'd seen me, and they shot. They didn't wait till I came out.
They detonated?
They detonated a blast, and then it blasted all this dust and bad air, which if I'd been like 20 feet further, it would have killed me.
The charge exploded about 30 feet from Janice, and luckily, the explosion came from a side tunnel.
I was just a bit around the corner, but close enough to get a little blast of rock dust and my helmet blown off.
It blew your helmet off?
Oh, yeah. But I was uninjured, just like, holy crap, that was close. And it's just a lack of attention. Me making the assumption that they'd seen me go by, and maybe they hadn't, and them shooting without having made sure no one was coming.
And did you say anything?
No.
Why?
Well, this is something I thought about a lot, because I had other accidents in the mine, too. I didn't want to draw attention to myself as a female. I just didn't want to draw attention to the fact that I'd made a mistake, too.
In Colorado's history of hard rock mining, underground work was almost entirely done by men. But by the 1970s and 80s, companies started hiring a few women, and Janice Sanders was one of them. She loved geology, she loved being underground, but she had to endure a work culture that was sometimes sexist and occasionally even hateful. Welcome to the Magic City of the Southwest, a podcast about the places we love and the stories we tell about those places. I'm Adam Burke. On today's episode, one woman's story of working underground in the dying days of hard rock mining.
A little lighter weight, thank goodness.
So you had lighter weight stuff.
Yeah, a little narrow rock pick, yeah.
The mines around Silverton are all closed now, but you can still get a little glimpse of mining in the basement of the San Juan County Mining Heritage Museum.
Seeing the diggers hanging there, the yellow pants, I like seeing that.
There are remnants here from the early years of silver and gold mining, which drew immigrants from all over the world to Silverton in the late 1800s.
And then this right here, this little engine.
And there are relics from the more recent past, too.
This is really cool. This is an electric engine.
Janice Sanders pats her hand on a boxy yellow machine, about 3 feet high, sitting on a stretch of railroad line.
This was about the size that we had underground. Like the big engines were at the bottom of the mine. And in the upper stopes, you'd have smaller engines like this little electric engine and smaller cars like that.
The museum's basement is fashioned to look like an underground mining tunnel. Narrow gauge rail lines, iron carts, the walls and ceilings covered with dark plaster to resemble the ribs of a mine shaft.
This is really an accurate reproduction of a mine. They've done a great job with the chutes, the stope, the loaded mine car filled with really good ore. That's great ore.
Piles of broken rock the size of bowling balls sparkle in yellow light.
You could see the pink rhodonite, and you can see pyrite, zinc ore, sphalerite.
What's that shiny stuff?
The shiny stuff that we're seeing here it's cubic and it's bright silver, that is galena, which is a lead ore.
It's pretty.
Yeah, it's really pretty.
Sanders stops in front of a wooden box.
That's a coffin skip there.
It looks like a small coffin, standing on end, attached to a steel cable that disappears into a hole in the ceiling.
See, this is a hoist here, a small hoist. The miners would put their gear in this little box. It's a little smaller than a coffin, actually. And
it's like a dumbwaiter for tools.
Yeah, dumbwaiter for tools, and then they'd hoist it up the level so that they wouldn't have to carry all that. But like sometimes as a geologist or even the miners, we would ride these things up.
Wow, you climb into this. This is not even the size of a coffin.
Yeah, you could ride it up, and I did. And then one time we had samples, and one of my team members went down to send the coffin skip up for me to load the samples on. And it's supported by like a 6x6 post. And I stepped on that post, and I was, just wanting to be efficient, wanting to be a man. But I'm standing there and I'm going, God, I forgot my gloves. I can't stand the feel of the gritty, wet dirt and rocks and like that. My gloves were laying about 5 feet away. And I was just fighting in my mind, like, I want to be tough, but I hate that feeling. I stepped off that 6x6 and it cracked and the thing fell 200 feet down.
This was a dangerous job.
Yeah, it was a dangerous job. Yeah.
Janice Sanders hasn't worked in mining for over 30 years, but in this museum, the thrill of the work, the mix of danger and professional satisfaction comes flooding back for her. She was still a teenager in junior college when she fell in love with earth science.
My first geology class, I finally figured out what I wanted to do. Prior to that, I hadn't any interest in any vocation. And then, I don't know, it just intrigued me. I like to think of it as the karma of geology. Where did it come from? What made all this variance of rocks and rock styles and how volatile it is, the ground turned upside down and flipped over, And I just loved it. I was so excited by it. It just really generated my interest.
Following college and a few short-term jobs, she returned to the San Juan Mountains.
I'd already worked at the Sunnyside Mine while I was finishing college as a sampler, going underground and taking samples. So I came back to Silverton and I got hired on as a full-time geologist. But I think I hit the jackpot. Being here, settling down, working underground. I kind of love the adventure, just wandering around that mine. My job was to go and look where they'd blasted the night before and then go and sample. And I would just go everywhere in the mine by myself.
Does that mean when you're walking around, you're ducking into tunnels or what?
Oh, yeah, we're walking into, we didn't call them tunnels. We'd call them stopes or, yeah. But tunnels works. Yeah, we would walk into tunnels. The mine is like a honeycomb or like an anthill. There's tunnels. We'll call them tunnels, going in all directions. You go up, you go sideways. Just following the vein. That's our job, to follow the vein and mine as close to the mining width of the vein as possible. So you get all the ore without dilution, but don't miss any of the ore.
This was a time in your life when these mines were active, when this industry was active here. It was at the tail end of all that. And the fact that we're in a museum and this is the best place to come to have this conversation says something about what's happened. I mean, we're talking about essentially a lost world.
Yeah, I've thought of that. I felt so fortunate to be able to live an end of an era. It's like, you're a little kid and you're watching a Western movie and we don't live in the Wild West anymore, but you just have that nostalgic feeling. And I just feel so grateful that I had the opportunity to work and live that.
When you look back at this life that you lived, is this lost world lost for ill or mostly for good, or how do you see it?
It's kind of a mixed bag. I would say mining went downhill here and other places in the U.S. because of economics. The cost of mining for the return wasn't making a profit. So it was impossible. At that time, gold went to $800 and people went crazy. And then when it dropped again, it just wasn't economic to mine anymore. Sometimes I feel a little sad that we don't have the same community we had with the mining community. It was tight, really tight. We had big town dinners called the Knife and Fork Club, and just a lot of things where community came together.
Do you think it was because you all lived and suffered and worked in the mines?
I think it was also because it was a small town, a lot of snow, and not much else to do. Yeah, but I also think it was a community that worked together in the mines. I can't say I was a tight part of it because it was more of a brotherhood, but I could witness it. Yeah.
But it's interesting that you sort of correlate the economy of mining with a kind of community texture and vibe that existed because of it that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of, like I'm going to equate it to a football team in a small school. We're all on the same team. We all have the same goals. We're working together, to make this thing happen. So a lot of like-minded people, I guess. And then basically when you have like-minded people, it's a community.
In some ways, Janice Sanders misses that tight-knit community and the adventure of working underground. It was a job that allowed her to fulfill her dream of working as a geologist. And yet, as a woman, she still felt like an outsider.
I did want to be here, and so part of it's pride. You want to be here because you did this education, you love this kind of work, you put up with a lot, because you really feel good that you've got this job when other people maybe would have liked it too. But being in the boys' club and not being a part of it, was a little tough. Actually, I wouldn't want to be in a part of it, but I didn't like the discrimination. One team always called me, I thought they were calling me Peaches.
It was a Spanish word, right?
Yes, Peaches. So I found out it was boobs. But I thought it was peaches. So I was okay with it, And I didn't understand it, so I wasn't offended, thank God. And they were just decent people, kind of just making a joke. The guys all had nicknames too, some of them much worse than boobs. So, so there were, some little things like that, but you can deal with that.
There were probably men who disliked working with women, but just didn't say anything about it to Janice. There were men at the mine who treated her well, and men who made clumsy but earnest efforts to build rapport with her. But in a few of her interactions with male mine workers, an unmistakable meanness came to the surface, sometimes even naked hostility. For her part, Janice responded with toughness, indifference, and silence.
In those days, it really felt like if you can't tough it out, you shouldn't be there. And I felt like I had to act like one of the guys, in order to not get more harassment.
Looking back, she thinks some of these men were testing her.
They probably thought if they harass her enough, she'll leave.
It was like a game of cat and mouse played on the checkerboard of 1980s gender politics, a game that no one acknowledged was afoot, including and especially not Janice.
They were pushing me to see if I cracked. Can you be as tough as we are? Can you hang here? Can you do this? That shouldn't have been part of my job, but it became part of my job.
It would start sometimes right at the beginning of the workday when mine workers gathered at the opening of the tunnel that led into the mine.
We all come to work. We're at the opening of the American Tunnel. We all get our diggers on. That's what we call those safety outfits, the overalls. We call them diggers. So we put on our yellow pants, our yellow jacket. We get geared up.
Once workers have their gear on, they board a train together.
You ride in on the man train going into work every day, and everybody kind of dozes off on that train ride in.
Remember, it's early. They're sitting in seats that face one another. For the train ride in, almost all of the workers turn their headlamps off. But there is one employee who always sits facing Janice, and this guy leaves his headlamp on.
This guy would just shine his light right in my face. And nobody, if you work underground, you don't shine your light in people's face. This guy would intentionally, the only guy with his headlamp on, shine it in my face.
The whole ride.
The whole ride. He was just an awful person. I mean, God rest your soul.
So he's not alive anymore?
Probably not.
Did you ever talk to him at all?
Oh, no.
So do you want to name him or no?
Yeah, I can name him. His nickname's Shorty.
Once at work, Shorty found other ways to antagonize Janice. Shorty was a hoistman. He operated the skip, which is what miners call the elevator that moves people from one level to another. And it might be good to map things out a little here. Remember, the mine is like a honeycomb. Each level has a letter attached to it, A, B, C, etc. Miners are working in different areas of this three-dimensional labyrinth. Often they're working in almost complete darkness and separated by long distances. So anyone who wants to move from one level to another in the mine has to interact with the hoist operator. And the way workers communicated with this operator was by pulling a chain with a bell attached to it. Depending on the level you're on and the level you want to get to, you ring the bell a certain number of times, like a code.
I don't remember the codes now. I apologize. But let's just say I'm on F level and I'm ready to go down. Maybe I would pull the chain 2 times or something. The skip would rise and get you.
But on the days Shorty was working, calling for the skip was not straightforward for Janice.
If he knew or if he suspected it might be me, he might get the skip up there. I'd get on, he'd drop it a little and then just not move it. So he'd trap you on it.
He'd trap you on it?
Yeah. He would know who would go up onto which different levels, The crews would go up first, and then the geologist surveyors would go up after all the crews would go. So if I was the only geologist that went to F level, and he knew that, and then I was signaling to return down, he would obviously know that I was the only one on F level. And then when I'd want to come down, he'd let me get on the skip, he'd drop it like 20 feet in the dark, and then just strand it.
And how long would he strand you for?
Until somebody else called or, just, 20 minutes maybe.
And what would you do?
I don't know. I would just wait and get off and get out of there.
And you never said anything? You never talked to him?
I did not. I never did.
Was this another instance of you just not wanting to acknowledge that he'd gotten you in some way?
Probably, not letting him know he might have, not letting him have the feeling that he won. Yeah, because I don't think he ever did.
So you would just sit there in the dark for 20 minutes waiting for him to bring you down to the level?
Yeah, I have a good imagination. Yeah, it's like, oh, I got 20 minutes. Yeah.
But would you be angry?
I didn't like it. I will say that. Yeah, I guess I was angry. I really disliked him. He's like, one of those guys who would pick on the littlest kid in the playground. He wouldn't pick on the big guys. I guess he thought I was fair game.
There are thousands of historic black and white photos online taken during the boom years of hard rock mining in Colorado. And of all the images of mine workers holding tools or posing in tunnels, I have yet to find a single woman among any of those workers. In the 1970s, equal employment laws and legal action pushed mining companies to start hiring women. According to the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration, less than 1% of U.S. mine workers were female in the early 1970s. Within a decade, women accounted for almost 7% of the mining workforce. But even then, it was extremely rare for a woman to do the actual drilling and blasting work underground.
You know, I don't know a woman that worked on one of the mining teams, but I've known of them. I've heard stories from even some of the guys that I worked with who would talk about, hey, there was this gal, and man, she could carry 2 jack legs, and, you know, yeah, it's cool. There were women in mining. You know, a lot of women, this is way before my time, but they would work outside hand sorting the ore, women and children. So they've had a part in mining too.
And by the 1980s, women were joining the underground mining workforce in significant numbers.
Well, there were a lot of women in my class. I mean, there was definitely more men, but it was new. I mean, we're boomers, so, you know, women in the working force was sort of still new even in the 1980s, especially, you know, and I guess you would call it a professional job that had traditionally been a man's job.
Beyond tradition and the sexism they faced, women also had to contend with superstition, too. Even into the 1980s, some mine workers believed it was bad luck to have a woman working underground.
I'd heard that, and I think there might be some that really still held to that. But most of the people that I met were just really decent people that didn't follow that.
You never heard anybody articulate that superstition?
I did hear it. But I would point out you've had more accidents before I was here than while I'm here. So,
you heard it from who?
I'm not sure. You know, just in
like banter?
A little bit, yeah. Bad luck. Bad luck's here.
Inside the Sunnyside Mine, there was a lighted, heated room they called the doghouse. It was a break room where underground workers could rest and relax during their shift.
We'd leave our pie cans or our lunch boxes with our lunch there. We'd have electric heaters on the ceiling, and we could bring something that we would want to heat up, and we could put it under the electric heaters. And then when we came back for lunch, we would have hot lunch. And it was a nice break room and basically okay.
One day, Janice arrived to take her lunch break, and she found that one of the other geologists, a guy she worked closely with, had made some changes to the interior of the doghouse.
This is one of my team workers. He put up pinup posters all over, just coated the walls with it.
Nude photos of women.
Yes, nude photos of women.
I'm assuming they're ripped out of magazines.
Yeah, all over the doghouse. And
who was this person?
I don't want to say his name, but he'll know. And I, you know, of course, I wasn't really fond of it. I didn't like it, but I didn't do anything about it.
For a week, workers ate their lunches in the doghouse, surrounded by images of nude women. During that time, just one coworker asked Janice how she felt about it. She says she pretended that she hadn't noticed.
Then one day I came in and they were all ripped down. And, you know, it was his pride and joy. So he was just upset as all get out, but it wasn't me who took him down. It was one of the engineers who found it very offensive and just didn't think it was cool.
How did you find out it was one of the engineers?
He told me.
What did he say?
He said, that guy's disgusting. Yeah, I know. I've been working with him. Since my first day underground, I've been working with him. I just want to reiterate that there were more good people down there than those few bad eggs. But I just felt like it was a trial by fire every single day. It's like a kid being bullied at school, you know, you just want to get through the day. You want to avoid recess or any situation where you might be isolated with somebody who's going to harass you. There were 3 mine shift bosses then, and 2 of them were awesome. And one of them was like, oh, you'd walk in and you just feel it, you know. disdain. You could just feel it dripping off of him. He just hated, well, I don't think he hated me personally. He hated me being female in the mine. He didn't know me, so he had no reason to hate me, but he hated having a female in the mine. He was a piece of work.
There was a dangerous paradox that women mine workers faced in the 1980s. On paper, they were fully vested employees with equal protection under federal law. In reality, it was a work culture where camaraderie and humor blurred with sexism and misogyny. Working underground in a dangerous profession, women were reliant on men, some of whom didn't view them as equals. For Janice Sanders, survival in the job meant not speaking up. And occasionally, that led to some very dangerous encounters.
Yeah, there were sometimes I didn't feel safe. High grading went on in this mine.
High grading?
That would be where, the miners would blast and, they'd see the fresh rock and they would see the glint of gold. You could see free gold. And in this one place, these guys found, a good stash of visible gold, and they hid it, somewhere.
Hid it, meaning they concealed it.
They concealed it so they could come back and get it later. Well, before they could come back and get it, someone else had found their stash.
Somebody had found their stash and taken it.
So the only other person who had been on that level is me, the geologist, who has to go up there and sample that level. So I got my sample, I'm leaving, and then these guys show up. And they just came at me like I'd taken it and threatened me. And I'm going, I didn't take your gold.
And then what happened?
Well, they just cornered me. I was out of the stope and, ready to get back on the lift, and they cornered me asking where their gold was. The guy was kind of aggressive anyway, and he said, you stole our gold. I kept backing up, and, they were just getting in my face, and they can push you down a hole and make it look like an accident. I got out of there with my life, and without their gold, I didn't take it. I guess they figured out that it wasn't me somehow because they didn't do it the next day. But yeah, it was scary.
And who did you talk to about it?
I didn't.
No one?
No.
In this particular profession, in this particular work environment, it's not just that you don't get to feel like you belong. It's that you are in dangerous circumstances where you're an outsider. You couldn't defend yourself. You couldn't tell people about what was going on with you.
Yeah, well, I didn't tell people.
I guess you could have.
I could have. I really have no logical reason as the adult I am now of why I wouldn't tell then. Isn't that funny? Why? What would I do today? I was just trying to preserve myself, self-preservation, be safe underground.
There were other women who worked with Janice Sanders at the Sunnyside Mine, but she says she did not talk with female co-workers about sexism and discrimination on the job. She's friends with some of those same women now in Silverton, but to this day, she's never talked with those former co-workers about any of this.
No, I've never really talked to anybody in the profession as a geologist or the miners that I work with. I've talked to friends, that aren't in mining about it.
Do you think these other women who were your contemporaries would acknowledge that this went on?
Oh, I think so. I'm sure that some of them would. One time I'm coming down and I see a nasty sign about one of them, and I'm going, so I'm sure they noticed it.
What did you see?
Oh, it was just nasty graphic drawing.
Of who?
One of the women who worked there in a professional capacity. I won't say their name or anything because it was pretty nasty. I didn't like it, but I didn't do anything about it. I just thought, I wonder why they're picking on her.
So I guess I have to ask, you didn't say anything then. You've never talked with your fellow female miners. Why now? Why are you talking now about this?
Because It's been a long time, and I have daughters and I have grandchildren, and I'm old enough now to know that I can stand up to it. I guess I'm just speaking about like I guess it was harassment now because I feel like I can, whereas I didn't feel like I could then. I've had employees of my own, and they've come to me when somebody has harassed them, and I've dealt with it for them. I couldn't do it for myself, but I can be strong for other people. That's what I've realized, because when it's happened in the businesses that I've owned, I've dealt with it, and there have been consequences. It makes me stronger to do it for someone else. But in doing that, I know that I have grown in myself, that I would protect myself now, and I would definitely call a spade a spade.
We were talking at the beginning of this conversation about this lost world of hard rock mining in Silverton, and the fact that you got to be a part of that world at the tail end of the mining economy here, and the privilege that you had. And downstream in the conversation, we've talked about all the things that you endured in order to be a part of that world. Do you have any memories that you cherish of the really good side of being underground and working as a geologist?
Yeah, there was this experience like the miners in 1978 had mined very close to the surface. And there was a lake called Lake Emma that was up there. And they got close enough that that lake flooded the entire mine, and it shut it down. No one was in the mine when it happened, or they all would have been killed. But it flooded the mine. A whole lake just went through it like a bathtub in an anthill. Then when I came to work there, this was after they'd been cleaning up after the flood and stuff, and I got to go up on one of the old levels that they'd worked, 50 years before, and nobody had worked up there. I could find old dynamite boxes and stuff like that, so it was like really going back in time. Here's the thing that made me feel good, because I still felt like the new person, and I'm working in a man's world, but I went up with a partner, and we were going to sample, and we brought a jackleg, that's an air drill, and they're very powerful. Those things can be dangerous. The leg of the hydraulic drill pushes, so you're not just pushing on the rock, but the hydraulic system is pushing onto the rock. The guy that was running it, he was one of my coworkers, it got away from him. And what can happen is that leg can expand up like that and pin you against the back. You could be trapped.
Up against the ceiling of the...
You could be trapped against the ceiling, a rib, and the drill would just hold you there and nothing you can do. And I was still kind of new, and I kind of froze looking at him trying to control that drill. And I reached down and turned the air off. And I just thought, how did I know how to do that? And that made me feel good, being up there underground and just having some insight come to me. Yeah, that was kind of cool.
And what did he say to you when you turned off the jackleg?
That was good thinking.
So he was appreciative.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting that you cherish that memory.
Yeah, because I didn't know how I knew how to do it.
Faced with a difficult, potentially life-threatening situation underground, you did the right thing and you had good instincts.
Yeah, I do. I appreciate that experience because it made me feel like I'm in the right place at the right time. I'm okay to be here in this job.
I mean, maybe even, dare we say, you belong in this job.
I did like it, yeah.
Since the 1990s, Janice Sanders has started more than a dozen businesses in the San Juan Mountains that cater to tourists. While she doesn't get the same thrill in retail, she says there are upsides to working above ground.
Retail's not too dangerous. You might get a paper cut. It's not the adventure that mining was. It really was like stepping into a different reality and then coming out every day and going back in the next day. Yeah, I'm really happy I had that opportunity. That's, I guess, what I really want to say. I lived the end of an era. Yeah, and this won't be happening again. Not like it was.
Janice Sanders worked for a little more than a decade in the mining industry. She still lives in Silverton, Colorado. This episode was produced by Magic City Studios in partnership with KSUT Public Radio. Support for the Magic City of the Southwest comes from the Red Line Arts in Society program and the City of Durango's Lodgers Tax Fund. Special thanks this time to Beverly Rich, Scott Fetchenheier, Steve Rich, Janice Sanders, and the Mining Heritage Museum in Silverton, Colorado. Thanks also go out to Tammy Graham, Ken Brott, and Mark Dugan at KSUT, and to Tommy Crosby and Catherine Wagner with the City of Durango's Lodgers Tax Fund. For more information about this project, please visit our website at themagiccity.org. I'm Adam Burke. We'll see you next time for more stories of the Magic City.